Hey Emberfest. My talk is called Making Mira, an intro to animating the web. So it's two parts for a reason, because first I made something, and that was because I wanted to. And then I was like, hey, I can use this to explain some things. So who am I? I'm Nick Schot, a senior software engineer at Simplabs. You can find me under the same handle everywhere at Nick Schot, because I don't have that underscore problem that Chris told us about. And when I'm not working on animation tech, I'm usually tinkering with other stuff like coffee, model trains, microcontrollers, and sometimes a combination of almost all of them when I work on a Schot timer for my semi-automatic espresso machine. And of course, it has a little animation going on. So what is Mira? Mira is a little robot created by Alonso Martinez, who at the time was working at Pixar. And he wanted to bring a little bit of the joy of animated movies into the real world. So he built this robot, which is basically, in his eyes, the minimal way of getting a fun interactive experience. So basically it's a robot that looks around. It can blink, it has face tracking too. I think you can play peekaboo with it. And there's a light inside. And I thought, hey, that's fun. I can bring this back into the digital world using the web. Yeah, so I built an Ember app for this presentation, and basically everything you see, so also all the animations that I'm not going to explain, are made using the same techniques. And you can already see the finished Mira here, but we'll go step by step to figure out how to actually build this thing. So like many stories on the web, we start with a div. It's a pretty simple div if you ignore the animation that just happened. Just 300 pixels wide and high with a white background. And the first thing we need to do is actually figure out Mira's shape. We're going to use an interesting feature that not too many people have probably used, of the border radius CSS property. Usually you would use the basic syntax where you provide a radius per corner, but there's actually a function where you can provide a horizontal and vertical radius per corner, which allows us to create an like elliptical shapes, or in this case an egg-like shape. Next up, we'll add a body to Mira, which is basically, it's the same shape as the overall Mira, and we'll give it some amber orange as the background color. And we've applied the same border radius here, because we're also going to add a box shadow to create kind of an effect as if there's a light inside. So it's a white inset box shadow. And because we've used that border radius, the box shadow will perfectly follow the egg shape that Mira has. Then we'll add a head. So this is an absolutely positioned element, just slightly smaller than Mira itself. And we're actually going to make it a lot bigger for reasons you will see in a later section of this presentation. And we're going to apply some border radius again using the same syntax to make the head kind of follow the 3D shape of Mira if it were a real thing. It's completely flat, of course. And then we'll hide the overflow on Mira to get to this kind of egg shape again. Then some finishing touches, because I wanted to give some depth to the whole thing. We're going to apply two box shadows to the head. One is a drop shadow at the bottom to give the idea that the head is on top of the body. And the other one, the inset one, the idea there is that it gives the illusion of depth, like the thickness of the material of the head, and that will become more obvious once we scale down the body slightly, so that the head can basically, like the real one, move over the body as we want. Then we need some eyes. There's a bunch of stuff here, but basically we'll position two elements in the place where we would expect the eyes on this thing, and eyes are usually round. So we'll apply a border radius again. So that's the basic setup we will use for Mira, and now we'll actually get to the animating part. We're going to be using all of the provided animation technology in browsers, like CSS Transitions, CSS Animations. We'll also use some Ember concurrency. And then the last part of this talk will be about some more advanced animation techniques. So CSS transitions are really great, in my opinion. They're quite simple. They allow you to transition between CSS states. They provide limited control over timing function. And that usually doesn't really matter all that much because CSS transitions are usually used for relatively small animations. So you can provide like a basic easing functions or a Bezier curve if you feel fancy. So CSS transitions run on CSS state changes like adding, removing a class, or when something like a hover happens. I've added some controls here so that we can move Mira's head around. And all this does is pass an argument into the Mira component, which adds a class. So we can style those classes to make Mira look around. So first up, we're going to make Mira look up. We can only make her look up so much because we can't really invert a border radius downward. So basically what we're going to do here is change the border radius and apply a small transformation so that the head shape kind of looks up. And if I show the overflow, this is why we made the div bigger. You can kind of see what happens here. And then we'll apply a CSS transition to the transform and border radius properties because those are the ones that we're actually changing. You can also pass all, but it's kind of, I did at some point in this presentation, but that kind of messed up the advanced animations that I'm going to be talking about later. So it's usually better to be specific about the things you want to transition to prevent any kind of weird issues you might run into. And if we now make Mira look up, you get kind of this nice effect. And we can hide the overflow or show the overflow again so that you can kind of see what's going on here. Then we'll do the same thing for looking left and right. I did not immediately get the right numbers here. You just have to play with them a little bit to figure out what works. But yeah, so the CSS transition is applied to the head, so that will still work also for looking around. So yeah, this looks quite interesting. we'll quickly hide that again. And then only the head tilt is left. So this is kind of the same, but our transformation is a little more complicated because we also want to rotate the head. And that then looks like this. And I especially like this transition because it kind of feels 3D. So that's basically the basic animations for Mira. And to bring some more life into it, we're also going to be animating the eyes, like eyes usually blink. And we're going to be using a box shadow for that, so that we don't need to add anything extra. And that will be a pretty convincing effect at speed. Yeah, so we have a closed state class, which will be eyes closed. That will basically turn the eyes white through the use of this inset box shadow. And we will apply a transition of 150 milliseconds because blinking is usually faster than looking around. And this is a slowed down version, so you can kind of see what's going on. It looks a little weird, but if it's sped up, it will look nicer. And to automate the blinking, we're actually going to be using Ember concurrency, which, if it isn't, probably should be in every Ember developer's toolbox, because it's great. We have a tracked property eyes closed, and we have a blink task defined that runs infinitely with a random kind of timeout, because blinking is not that consistent. And we'll keep the eyes closed for 150 milliseconds, which is the duration of the animation that we defined. And then the tracked property, if the eyes are closed, we will add a class closed, because that's what we wrote the styles for before. And now, eventually, Mira should start blinking. Yeah, that worked. It's random, so you never know how long it takes. So a short summary, CSS transitions are pretty simple and performant, because the browser just optimizes everything in the back They provide limited control, and if you want to do a couple of more advanced things, there's an add-on called Ember.js Transitions, which helps a bit with the management of the classes. So if you would have an element that enters the DOM, you could apply a CSS transition as well. Next up are CSS Animations. They're a little more advanced and allow you to do some cooler stuff. The API is entirely different because with CSS Animations you specify the animation through keyframes, which we will see in the next slide. Yeah, the overview of the entire animation is a little easier because everything is specified in one place. CSS Animations also allow you a little more control over timing and easing because you have control over those keyframes. And as such allows for more complicated effects. So yeah, I want to create a background pulse. We're going to do this with colors first because I was worried we would not see the actual effect properly with the contrast of this projector. So we'll define some keyframes where we change the background color of the body from red to blue. And on the body, we will define an animation with a reference to those keyframes. We will run it infinitely, so it's on a loop, and the animation will take 4 seconds. So if we run that, it looks like this. Looks a little jarring, and that's because it actually jumps back from the end to the front. But we can fix that by using a slightly different syntax. So you can specify keyframes using percentages. We can basically insert an extra frame in the middle. So we move from red to blue and then back to red. And that will give us a smooth animation. And the actual effect that I wanted to create here is kind of the idea that the light brightens a bit and then dims again. So we're going to do that by changing the amount of blur applied to the box shadow that we added earlier to the body. And now I'm very interested if you can see this. Yes, it actually works. So now it's kind of like a breathing effect, I don't know. So that's all the animations for Mira, I think. But we're going to do a little extra here, because you can do cool stuff with keyframes, as I promised. So we haven't really talked much about easings, but I think one of the most powerful easings available is the linear easing, which is basically that the time between every frame is identical, whereas with any other easing, it will probably either slow down or speed up towards the end, or whatever the timing function specifically is. But with a linear easing, you basically have the freedom for completely custom timings. And we're gonna make Mira jump through a custom defined set of keyframes. First, we'll add a shadow to kind of ground the Mira in the scene. And I'm, in this case, doing that with an extra element rather than a box shadow because I want a specific kind of effect. And we'll start with like a elliptical black div. I think it's a div. And we'll apply some opacity and blur to make it look like a kind of convincing shadow. Then to handle the jump, we will define another Ember concurrency task, which does nothing but block the execution of another jump while one is happening. So we've defined it as drop, meaning that if a jump is happening, you cannot run it again before it ends. And the only thing it does is wait for the duration of the animation. And we use the derived state of this concurrency task to add a class to Mira and the shadow element. Then this is our jump keyframes. And there's 3 parts to this. So first, Mira will prepare by kind of, kneeling. There's no knees, but I've made it kind of squished together. And then Mira will go up in kind of a stretched fashion, come back down, and then squish together again as she drops on the ground. And then I think we can see that in action here. Took me a while to get this kind of right. I'm no motion designer, so I had fun with this. But yeah, as you might notice, the shadow doesn't really do anything. Oh, now it does. Spoilers. And yeah, so I wanted to create a rather a more convincing effect, like what happens in the real world. If an object moves closer to a light source, the shadow usually grows. I actually had this intuitively. I had this wrong. At the first implementation, the shadow actually became smaller, and then I picked up an object, and so it was the other way around. So looking into the real world actually helps with these cases, rather than thinking you know what's happening. So the shadow keyframes follow the same like percentages as the jump animation, and so while Mira is jumping, we will scale up the shadow a little bit and lower the opacity. And as you already saw, it creates a pretty fun effect. So I think, yeah, that's all the animations for Mira done, and we're now going to move to some of the more advanced animation techniques. Oh, I've also added an auto button, which is also what you saw on the home screen, where basically a random timer is happening and switches between the available states of Mira, so you don't have to click these buttons all the time. So yeah, Mira will have a day in Rome, and these illustrations were graciously drawn by my lovely wife, Annegreet, on very short notice, so that's great. Yeah, so this first setup will actually still be using a CSS transition just to show that you can also do that. But as you might see, it's a little annoying to specify this because you have to get like the initial position right and then the end position as well. But the basic idea here is that Mira will move into the espresso shop to obviously get a coffee in the morning. Yeah, so let's see what that looks like. Yeah, so the overflow is hidden on the div. So yeah, then when we move back outside, the caffeine kicks in. That's but yeah, as I said, like specifying these positions is quite annoying, especially if you take into account that web apps are often responsive. And even for this, I was like, what aspect ratio is the projector going to be? I don't know. It was kind of hard to get this right. And it would be much better if we could do this in a declarative way. And to take a look at how that would work, we're going to the Colosseum. And we're joined by 8 of our Mira friends. So the setup here is 2 lists, a group, which is where the mirrors are now, and a queue. And there are 2 tracked arrays. And when you click on a Mira, they will move between the queue and the group respectively. So I can show that. Yeah, so basically the queue is over there. Now, how would we animate this? So the basic technique for all animation frameworks that provide this technique is the same. Yeah, the explanation is here. So we want to move an element A to position B, basically. So imagine that A is the group and B is the queue. And what happens is that just before A is unrendered, measurements are taken by the animation framework. The render happens, so A doesn't actually exist anymore. B does. We can take measurements of B and then do math stuff to make B look like A. And that all happens before the user can see anything. And then B is animated to actually appear as if moving from A to B. Yeah, so one of the main add-ons in Ember, written by Ed, of course, is Ember Animated, that allows you to do this. So we're going to modify our code a little bit to integrate Ember Animated. So we have we've changed the each loop into an animated each loop because that's how Ember Animated manages to intercept the rendering there. And we've defined 2 transitions, one for the queue, one for the group, and a duration. And these transitions look like this. So there's a couple of, Ember Animated works with sprites, which is basically a representation of what you're animating. And there's a couple of types. So we have kept sprites, and the kept sprite is basically all the mirrors that are left behind when another leaves. And by calling the move motion on these kept sprites, the mirrors that are left behind will smoothly move into their new position. And then for the group, we have a couple of more types of sprite, namely sent sprites and received sprites. And those are basically the sprites moving between the groups. So a sent sprite in this case is a Mira moving from a group to a queue, and a received sprite is the ones coming back. So let's see what that looks like. I have this button to enable them. Yeah. So now we can move them back and forth. And if we're quick enough, we can also interrupt this and move them to the back of the queue. I don't know why you would do this in real life, but that's fine. Also, to make this a little more COVID-proof, we'll move them a little further apart. And there's one more thing. These mirrors, of course, want to go into the Colosseum. So we'll need one more thing. There's a final type of sprite called a removed sprite. So when we remove a mirror from the array, the tracked array in this case, they will become a removed sprite. And Ember Animated allows you to specify like a final position for these elements. So we will translate the mirrors by 400 pixels to the left, making them appear to go inside the Colosseum. So yeah, let's move all of them to all the way back in the queue. And then I have this button, allow entry, which will make them move. Like they can also take a break. Oh, that was actually, yeah. Apparently 400 pixels wasn't enough in every case. And yeah, so you can also, this was basically on the same page. But you can also do this between routes in Ember. And what better representation than actual border that we have here in Rome, which is in the Vatican. So the white concrete is the border into the Vatican. And yeah, so the basic setup here is the same. It's just split over two route templates. So we have animated values in this case, and we've defined it as Mira. So Ember Animated knows what matches what. And we've defined a transition on only one side of the routes, because we will be animating those same received and sent sprites again. Yeah, as you can see here, this is the transition for this page. We have the received sprites and sent sprites again. We're not just going to move the mirrors in this case, but because there's perspective in this picture, we're also going to scale them. And Ember Animated handles this internally with magic. No, math, I mean. It's not magic. So if we enter Vatican City, this is a rather slow animation. It's a long walk, it's a very big building. We can see that Mira moves all the way to the front. So this button is actually a link to, so we're actually visiting a different page. We can also interrupt this and maybe interrupt this again. So yeah, that's kind of a very short summary of how to get started with this kind of animation technology. And there's one more thing that I would like to show you. Some of the people following me on Twitter have probably seen this earlier this year. Yes, so as some of you will know, Ember Animated is technically mostly meant as low-level primitives, so they're not too easy to use when you're doing some more advanced animations. And earlier this year, I took a vacation, or actually codecation. Thanks, Chris, again. Unfortunately, I couldn't edit the tweet. So. Where I spent 2 weeks actually playing with a newer animation tech provided by the browser called the Web Animations API, which is basically a JavaScript version of the CSS Animations API. So you also work with keyframes, but everything is triggered from JavaScript. And what I wanted to do here is, in my opinion, quite cool. So you see these same two lists here, but they're also like transformed. One is smaller than the other, and they're rotated differently. But the thing I wrote here does a whole bunch more math to actually smoothly and automatically make them animate properly, even with all those transformations applied. And while this is cool, I also wanted to make this very easy to use. So the API you see on the left, on the right, is a little simpler in this case. This is not like it's going to be like this. This was an experiment. It's based on the Framer Motion API, which is a React animation library. And basically, we define an animated shared layout, and we'll wrap the list items into motions. And in this case, I've applied some Spring physics. So it's not an easing, but it's a little more than that. So you see a plain object definition of that Spring at the top, and we pass that into the motion component. There's also no reason why this couldn't be a modifier nowadays, but I didn't have any more time. Yeah, and so this Spring thing is pretty interesting, if I do say so myself, because as you saw, you have to provide these browser APIs with keyframes. So you have to calculate the entire thing ahead of time. So yeah, this is basically a just-in-time Spring to keyframe kind of thing that happens right as you click, and then smoothly animates it to the other side. If you would like to know more about this or what I'm doing, please come find me, because this is too much to put into this talk. That's it.